of this breathing. Stepping a little further back in this mindfulness practice, you now start to become aware of your thoughts. Yeah, you just watch your thoughts. A little bit like, on a beautiful day, you lie on the grass, you watch the sky and you watch the clouds. They come into your field of vision and then they leave. Of course, your mind works a lot quicker than the clouds in the sky. But some of them hang around, some of those thoughts, yeah. But the point is, you're just observing them from a quiet position. You don't need to control the mind, right? Or stop the thoughts, or do anything with those thoughts. Just watch them. Of course, some of the thoughts are quite benign. Some of the thoughts are very pleasant. Some of the thoughts are like a dark cloud. Yeah. But you're not your thoughts. From this practice, this very ancient practice of mindfulness, you can very gradually become aware that I'm not my physical body. This physical body had a beginning, it will have an end. I'm not that physical body. I'm the observer of the breath. I'm the observer of all the changes in my body as I age. And I'm not my mind. I'm not my thoughts. Once when I was pretty young, my teacher said to me, he said, the mind is like an amazing terrorist. It rattles its saber at you. But rarely does it pull off anything. And in a month, a week, a year later, you reflect on that time when the mind was giving you some hassles. Nothing came of it. Yeah. Just because you think of something, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Right? Just because the mind presents something doesn't mean that you have to actually follow through with it. Right? You just observe it. It makes for a far more peaceful life, as do all the yoga practices. Just breathing, enjoying the music. I'm sorry I interrupted it a little bit before. Okay. So, questions on the yoga system. I have a very good friend. I have a number of good friends who are also yoga instructors, meditation teachers. This particular friend has been a friend of mine for 40 years or so, and he was sharing with me recently a question that one of his students posed to him, right? And I'm going to share the answer with you, right? This lady, a very nice lady, right, who I eventually came to meet, she had been trained rather extensively in yoga asanas and pranayama. Asana, for those who don't know, means yoga moves, yoga poses. Pranayama is the yoga breathing. Also, she learnt yoga relaxation techniques, and she thoroughly enjoyed them, to the point where she eventually trained to be an instructor herself. She's a very giving lady, right? And she wanted to share her understanding, her experience of yoga with her students, and she enjoyed that. But like a lot of people who, you know, want to take it a little bit further, they start to realize that there's more to yoga than just the exercise system, as wonderful as it is. And I speak from a lot of experience because that's my day job. I love it. Right? This is not a criticism of Hatha yoga, not at all. Right? Not at all. It's wonderful. But she thought there must be something else. So she went back to her original teachers and she found out that they didn't have a great deal more to offer. So she did what a lot of us would have done in those circumstances if we wanted to take it a bit further. You know, she went online, she started, you know, looking here, doing her homework, trying to garner some information, gather some information. Eventually, you know, after some time, she pieced together some practices that she began incorporating into her, you know, daily life. And once she became familiar with those practices and how it made her feel, etc., she started sharing them with her students. She then, through circumstances, came into contact with my friend. My friend, like myself, also teaches the Bhakti Yoga path, right? The path of devotion and Karma Yoga. And she came along as a student and listened quietly and enjoyed what my friend had to say. Fairly quickly she worked out that my friend, he wasn't motivated to teach for some sort of financial gain or to gather followers or anything like that. And she became quite comfortable with him as a person, right? And started to incorporate what he was sharing with her, right, and the other students, right, into her life. And slowly, you know, she'd hear something, she'd practice, she liked it, she heard some more, she incorporated some more, etc., etc., as one does in a relationship, yeah, unless one's foolhardy and just sort of dives in, right? But no, she was an intelligent. She is, and not was, she is. She's an intelligent person, right? And so eventually she developed enough, I guess, trust in my friend to sort of open up, and because he wasn't prying, right? Open up and tell him, you know, what she did, what she has been doing, right? And how she's been incorporating some other practices into her, you know, teaching and into her lifestyle. Right. And she was concerned that perhaps these practices weren't exactly coming in an authoritative lineage, right? And that the information she was receiving perhaps wasn't as reliable as she may have thought it was when she first came across it, right? And she was also concerned perhaps it was going to undermine her new interest in the Bhakti Yoga system, which she was thoroughly enjoying as well, right? So what did my friend say? You'll have to wait because I, at this stage, would just like to sort of give you a little bit of an overview of the yoga system, right? Because once you move off the yoga mat, once you move beyond the physical exercise system and the pranayama and the yoga nidra, right, as many people hopefully would like to, right, it can be very confusing, very, very confusing, right? And there are no you know, guaranteed sources for you to, you know, consult with, right? Not immediately, at least, right? So, you know, you come across, you know, you're on the internet, you're seeing Raja Yoga, you're seeing Kundalini Yoga, you're seeing Bhakti Yoga, you're seeing Karma Yoga, you're seeing Astanga Yoga, Hatha Yoga, you know, Gnana Yoga. Man, there is Sankhya Yoga. There's so many yogas. It's very confusing. If you are genuine in your search for an understanding of the yoga system, and then it will be arranged for you to come into contact with somebody who is in possession of great knowledge. I'm not talking about me, by the way. All right. We're talking about somebody who has achieved the goal of the yoga system, not just philosophically, but actually is living it, breathing it, experiencing it. Right? Such a person is known by different names. Some of those names we're familiar with, you know, a yoga master, a spiritual master. These are synonyms, yeah. A guru, right? Some of the names we're not so familiar with, acharya, sadhu, transcendentalist, right? These people will tell you that all of those branches, all those different yogas are branches of the same tree. That the yoga system is really one, right? All with the same goal, just with a different pathway, right? It's a little bit like this, right? Let's say we take a mountain, not a mountain range, but it's sort of like a standalone mountain, yeah? And let's say you want to sort of traverse the base of it, circumambulate the base of it. And we'll say that you start at the west, because we're living in the west, yeah? You come to the west, the western aspect of that mountain, you look up there and what do you see? Oh, you see the apex and you think, wow, I'd love to be up there. You know, I think the air would be fantastic, the view would be extraordinary, right? But you're confronted with this daunting, you know, sheer rock face, craggy cliffs. It's very uninviting. So you think, yeah, I'd sure like to get there, but you know, that's too hard. So I'll head south, right? And so you come to the southern aspect of the mountain and it's not much better. Yeah, it's softened up a little bit. Now we have, you know, a very dense forest with very thick undergrowth. And you think, wow, you know, I'll need a machete to get through this. And I just don't have one, and I don't have the energy. I think I'll move towards the northeast. And so you're on your journey even further, right? And as you move, perhaps the terrain softens a little bit. You come to the northeast aspect, and it's changed dramatically. It is now nothing but inviting. You have gentle slopes, grassy even, right? And then you think, wow, this is doable, right? And these different aspects of the mountain are really analogous to the different yoga systems. Some are very difficult. Some are totally impractical for the time that we live in. And some are much, much easier, all right? A yoga teacher just didn't become a yoga teacher. He or she had a teacher of their own, right? They heard from an expert teacher, right? An expert teacher, they heard and they applied. Importantly, they applied. And through the care and the expertise and essentially the love and the power of their spiritual teacher and the practices that teacher shares with the aspirant, right? Then that aspirant starts to have changes in their life, right? They develop great clarity of vision, penetrating spiritual intelligence, purity, yeah? And they start to become like their teacher. And they can see things as they are. Because if you're, and you know, like those teachers in a sense are sitting on top of the mountain and they can see all the different aspects. They can see all the different people who are trying to come to the mountain. They, of course, they come down, they try and help those people, right? But they have this top-down vision, right? This expansive vision. And it is amazing, right? It is amazing. The condition that I've just described is often described as wisdom. right? But the wisdom of the yogis is not like the wisdom of a philosopher, right? They're just not into, you know, the speculative process, right? Their wisdom is a very basic, not basic, but it's very practical, right? It serves as the foundation, the basis of their peacefulness and their happiness, which is what we're all looking for. Right? We're all looking for that. We're all looking for happiness, pleasure, peacefulness, peace of mind, etc., etc. Now, we of course all live in communities, societies, nations. We all live on the same planet, and we're all governed by different individuals, right? Governments. And they're supposed to be leading us, right? And this is not a criticism so much of the governments, you know. They're supposed to be leading us. But their vision is not the same vision as that of the yogis, right? It is somewhat clouded. They are all, you know, these governing individuals, right? They're all brain smart. They're, you know, politicians, scientists, and worryingly so, more and more business people. You know, they're brain smart, they're street smart, but they don't have this spiritual vision that the yogis have at all. Some of them, most of them in fact, are very well-intentioned individuals. They have the welfare of their constituents at the forefront of their mind, or at least somewhere there. They know they should have that there. Some of them, of course, you know, that is very much a side issue. They have their own bank account, their own power, their own influence, right? Their own fame and glory at the forefront of their mind. But by and by, especially in Western democracies, they're, you know, they're not as prominent, right? Although you may not agree. But let's just say that they're well-intentioned people. They have turned their back on these ancient bodies of wisdom, such as yoga, right? These ancient bodies of wisdom have served mankind for many, many, many thousands of years. Very nicely. But they turn their back on them for many reasons, right? Some of them, they don't know anything about it. Some of them who have some, you know, contact with them say, oh, it's a little bit too intangible, a little bit inscrutable. It's not very relevant, right? It's not very scientific. It's a bit wishy-washy, right? This is because they don't understand it, right? If you don't understand something very clearly, then you can't make it relevant. You can't understand it. You can't share it, right? So that's their criticism. Let me just take that one word, not very scientific, right? The word science actually means truth, right? And the scientific process is, you're a scientist, yeah? You start to investigate some area of your, you know, expertise, and you find some place that you would like to, some problem that you'd like to kind of, you know, delve into. You then devise experiments to investigate, and you're left with data, yeah, which then you're supposed to, you know, in a very objective fashion, examine. Right? Of course, the objectivity is a bit of a challenge, but you've got data. It's not airy-fairy. It's very tangible, right? It's observable reality, right? Now, one of the things with the scientific process is that if you do throw some light on an area, right, that nobody else has done so beforehand, then you get recognized. You get your experiment published in a scientific journal. And of course, that's what professional scientists like, because once you get recognized, you get validation, right? Then you can get more money for, you know, more funding, perhaps get a better job at a more prestigious university, etc., right? And once you're being published, and let's say you're an Australian scientist, then somebody on the other side of the planet, and, you know, Stockholm or somewhere, they can reproduce that experiment, much like, you know, the recipe for, you know, a cake. Except, of course, the scientific recipe is far more demanding and exacting in terms of temperatures and all the rest of it, right? Very, very complex, right? Now, the same applies to the yoga system, in the sense that if you come up, you know, if you're fortunate enough to have the association of the spiritual scientists, those who know the truth behind spirituality, true spirituality, then they will give you the guidance. You follow in their steps, right? There is a guaranteed, reproducible result. You will come to the same conclusions. You will come and start to have the same experiences, right, as the yoga master. And in this sense, you know, yoga is experiential, right? You experience it, you feel it, and it's experimental, just like the lady I was saying before. She listened, she applied. Or she liked it, she applied a little bit more. Or she went back and listened a little bit more, applied a little bit more, right? But unfortunately, as I said before, the scientists and those who lead us have changed, turned their backs, right? And they've turned to economic development and scientific innovation, technological innovation, really, right? Why? Well, this is a little bit harsh, but hear me out. Simply because they're materialists, right? A materialist is not just a person who overconsumes and buys fancy goods and goes on too many holidays and stuff like that, although that's symptomatic, right? No, a materialist is a person who actually identifies themselves as material. In other words, you know, they go into the bathroom in the morning to brush their teeth and they see an image and they say, that's me. And we've all done that, right? At some stage in our life, perhaps you're still doing it, right? I still do it. I have to remind myself, right? And so you see a man, you see a woman, you see, black, white, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist. You see, you know, somebody of one occupation or another, right? And you identify, oh, that is me. And then you start to identify with your thoughts. You start to identify with your desires and your fears and, you know, all of those things that we were talking about before with the mindfulness exercise. And this, from the yoga perspective, is a gross misunderstanding. A gross misunderstanding. They start to lay down tracks for society, right, based on misrepresentations, misconceptions. Their understanding is flawed, right? Their understanding is flawed, and it leads society to conclusions that are very frustrating. It leads to what we're experiencing now in society, right? The leaders of society need to, you know, they need to have a great deal more objectivity, but they can't because they don't have something to lift the fog from their vision. And that something that I'm talking about is the yoga wisdom. The yoga wisdom and the yoga practices, they can, even the dullest person can have such amazing insights, right? The yoga wisdom can serve as the most remarkable GPS service that you could ever conceive of. Yeah, you know, you can go to some foreign land, be put in a busy environment, given a car, given a good phone, good connection, a good GPS service, and wow, the journey is nice, the journey is exciting, and the destination is just amazing. This is the yoga system. They turn to economic development because if you identify as your body, right, and if I have your best interests at heart, then, you know, I'm going to try and make you happy. Now, if I'm thinking I'm my body, then I'm thinking, well, if I bring pleasure to my body, and if I think I'm my mind, right, this is the materialistic conception of life, then I'll bring pleasure to my mind, right? Bringing pleasure to the body, we all know about that. That means feeding pleasure in through the senses, something nice to smell, something nice to look at, something nice to touch, which includes, the sexual experience, something nice to taste, and something else, probably hearing. I don't know if I repeated myself there. And bringing pleasure to the mind, tends to revolve around trying to seek acceptance. Perhaps, you got a bad case of it, adoration, those types of things. And there's nothing wrong with all this stuff, except it doesn't bring you that amazing silent witness, the observer of the body's changes as it ages from youth to adulthood and beyond, right? It doesn't bring you peacefulness. It doesn't bring you happiness. Technology is the same. When I was born, I kind of got born just as TV in the late 50s, right? Just as TV kind of hit the scene. And I grew up with TV. And, it was used as an advertising medium. And they started to push technology. And I remember my mum, she just loved all the new technology for the household, the new fridge and the new stove, and especially the new washing machine, because the old one, you had to kind of crank it and feed the clothes between a couple of wheels to dry it out. And now it kind of did it all for her, and she was loving it, of course. And, of course, technology wasn't just focused on, goods for the house, white goods for the house. No, it got into, commerce, it got into business, it got into agriculture, it got into construction. And, of course, the promise was to everybody, right, who was considering consuming this technology, the promise was, this is going to make your life so much easier. And if you're in business, so much more profitable, right? But, 40, 50 years on, the evidence is not there, right? The evidence is not there that bringing pleasure to your body and your mind is going to make you any happier. And how do I know? Because the litmus test of happiness can be seen in the data that is revealed through suicide, drugs, alcohol, the data concerning the usage of these things, right? So we got suicide, drugs, domestic violence, right? None of these stats are going anywhere but upwards, regrettably. And, you do not have people overusing drugs and alcohol. You do not have people engaging in, domestic violence, etc., if they're contented. Quite the contrary. You're more content, you're more peaceful, then those stats start to head south, which is, of course, what we all want. We all want that, right? The unwise application of technology can be seen very, very clearly over the last decade in terms of social media. The jury has been out for quite some time now, right? Social media has basically been around since the first iPhone, whatever that was. I think we're up to i12 or 13 or something like that. And I'm talking now in 2020, right? So it's been around for a while. And the scientists that study this, the sociologists and behavioral scientists and psychologists and those types of people, right? They've done studies on the effects of, Facebook and various platforms. What's it doing to young people, right? It's not bringing about the social cohesion and harmony that it was promised, right? No, quite the contrary. It's feeding into depression and loneliness and unhappiness, right? So, the leaders of society, they don't have the service of the GPS system. They don't have the top-down approach, the plan elevation. They don't have access to this. And they don't want to turn towards it for the reasons that I mentioned. They don't want to turn. But that doesn't mean that you as an individual can't. Of course, you can and you should, because, well, you're concerned with your own happiness. And when you're happy, you're just like a full cup. You just share it. And it's infectious. You know it's infectious. There's surely somebody in your group of friends or family who's just sort of like the life of the party. They're always kind of nice, yeah, and you like to be around them. You can be that person. Definitely you can be that person. It takes a little bit of effort, right? Just as it takes some effort to climb that mountain, right? But if you find the right teacher, then they will guide you from the western aspect to the northeastern aspect. They will guide you from the tough to the more accessible pathway to the peak. The peak meaning the gradual elevation of your consciousness, the gradual improvement and maturity of your understanding, how to relate to people, right? Because this really, the overview of the yoga system, the first thing that the teacher will teach you is your relationship with your mind and your body, right? Namely that you're not your mind, you're not your body. Your relationship with other people, including people in forms inferior to the human form. So we're talking about, excuse me, I scratched myself just before I went on. Inferior to the human form, so we're talking animals and insects and plant life and stuff like that, right? And those in superior forms. And when I talk superior forms, we're talking about, they're called in the yoga system demigods with a small d and a small g. They're empowered individuals who have been delegated responsibilities in this physical world, looking after certain aspects of the physical world, the rain, the sun, etc., right? And of course, that teacher will also share with you, this is all part of the wisdom, right, that the teachers share, right? They will share with you your relationship to the entire material and spiritual energy, and natural enough, right, your relationship with the source of that spiritual and material energy. And of course, that is ultimately a person. Ultimately personal, right? So, the yoga system does have a lot to offer, a lot of wisdom, a lot of different practices, and you'd be surprised, most of them have very little, if anything, to do with physical yoga, right? Again, I'm not hitting on physical yoga. Like I said before, I teach it, I practice it every day of my life, and it keeps me, in good nick, as they say in Australia, and I enjoy it. I love it, but I know that there is more, much more. It doesn't matter how well you look after your body, it will age. It doesn't matter how amazing your diet is and how little stress you have in your life, etc., it will age. How do I know? Because all those amazing yogis of yore, right, who lived when, organic was the only thing you could get, right? All the water, all the food was organic, and there was no stress, and there was, everything was just perfect in a physical sense. They all aged, and their bodies, died. But of course, they prepared for that experience through life, through the practice of yoga. So getting back to the girl, and my friend's response. So if you just remember, she was practicing yoga, she was teaching, yoga as we understand it in the West, yoga mats and, all that sort of stuff, right? And she wanted to add a few, different elements, some, more metaphysical elements to her teaching and share that with her students, right? But she was having reservations about the information that she had received and that she was, teaching. She was also having reservations about the effectiveness of those practices, and that she'd gleaned from, the sources on the internet, right? She wasn't very happy with what was going on. She couldn't feel much, etc., etc. She was concerned about, that she was sharing something that was perhaps not genuine with her students. She was an honest lady, a nice lady, right? And she was concerned about whether all of this stuff, particularly she was concerned about the practices, because most of the practices I'm talking about, they revolved around the movement, essentially the attempt to raise what is known as the Kundalini, right? And if you've just joined us and you don't know anything about yoga, this is fascinating stuff, but your eyes might be turning, right? There is an energy that sits at the base of the spine, right? It's called the Kundalini. It's stored down there and in and around the kidneys, yeah. And there's an attempt through different breathing processes and different asana processes to raise this energy through different energy plexuses. They're called chakras, energy centers in the body. There's 7 of them, right? And as you raise this energy, and this is so much easier to say than to do, your consciousness starts to clear. The fog lifts, right? And the living being, the witness of the mind and the body, she resides in the Anahata chakra, the heart chakra, right? And you can raise the energy to that point, and you can take the living being with that prana and leave through the crown of the head and merge into an existence that is far more pleasurable than anything on this planet, right? Far, far more pleasurable. It is just one aspect of the supreme, right? So that's what she was doing. She was trying, she was using different breathing techniques and different mantras, right? They're called Bindi mantras. And she was concerned about whether all of this was going to undermine, somewhat dilute her interest, her progress, and her understanding of Bhakti Yoga, which is what my friend was teaching, yeah? So the answer that my friend gave was essentially, no, it's not going to help. It's not going to hinder you at all, right? I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're a yogi or you're just a full-on materialist, just going out there trying to make money, right? For no other reason than just to live a luxurious life. Regardless of what you want to do, you've got to have a strong body. The Hatha Yoga system, the system of exercises and breathing, right? It's part of a greater picture known as the Kundalini Ashtanga Yoga system. It's very scientific, right? It's very, very scientific, and you can get incredible results. It can change your physicality immensely. It can bring great peacefulness to your mind. Of course, there are other ways to keep healthy too. Right? There are other ways to keep healthy, right? But the Hatha Yoga system is amazing. So he said, no, that's no problem. You want to learn how to manipulate the prana, move this subtle energy in your body. No problem. That's what acupuncturists do, and that's what herbalists do. That's what some massage therapists do, right? All the traditional guys. That's what yogis do. That's what Qigong masters, right? The Taoist, that's what they learn to do. They learn to manipulate the prana, that subtle energy. The Chinese call it qi, through the different energy meridians. And in the Indian system, those meridians are known as nadis, and in the Chinese system, they're known as jingluo. It's just different names describing the same subtle system. It's subtle. It's not as though you can dissect a body and see these channels, right? But you can learn to manipulate them for health. No problem. All good. All good so far. This, however, getting down to, I'm just keeping a little bit of an eye on the time, getting down to the attempt to raise the Kundalini, this energy stored at the base of the spine. This is very tricky. This belongs to an incredibly ancient system, right? As I mentioned, it's called the Ashtanga Yoga system, and it was practiced widespread in Treta Yuga. Treta Yuga goes back many, many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? And in that time, and people had much greater faculty for, they had much stronger bodies. They had, they lived a lot longer. Mental clarity was just, amazing. The general feel of society was very supportive for spiritual practices, right? Not like now. Now it's kind of not very supportive at all. It's very supportive for materialistic practices, right? But it was hard, right? It wasn't hard for them, but it's hard for us. The system, the remnants of it still exist because all the yoga systems, right? The knowledge is passed in lineages from perfected teacher to very interested student, who in turn becomes enlightened and passes it on. And of course, in the beginning, it was passed down in an oral tradition for many hundreds of thousands of years, until just recently, 5,000 years ago, right? 5,000 years ago, it was written down, right? It was written down. So the remnants of these practices are still here, but it requires great austerity for us as individuals in this era known as Kali Yuga, right, to do. You need to be practicing asana for many hours a day. You need to be practicing pranayama, the breathing system, for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. It's a very painful practice, right? To raise this energy is very painful. We read about it if you're interested in these things, and we kind of like romanticize them, but they're not that romantic. They're very demanding physically and mentally. You can't have family. You've got to live in a very remote place, right? There's no sexual contact of any type. It's not that practical, right? If you're an urban yogi, so to speak, right? And there are very, very few expert teachers in that field. Very, very few. There are many people who talk about it, right? Many people who talk about it, but the vast majority of them have never experienced it, right? Never experienced it. I speak with some authority on this because my teacher, before he embraced the Bhakti Yoga system, taught the Kundalini system and realized the goal of the Kundalini system, right? So it is very difficult, right? And quite dangerous. In the 1960s, I was just a little bit too young for it, but it was the hippie movement, the flower power, all this sort of things, right? And there was an awareness of drugs, and there was a sort of a sexual sort of freedom that people, so-called freedom, that people hadn't never experienced before. It started in America, right? And all these young American kids, 20, right? They'd turn their back on their wealthy, materialistic family upbringings and, started to embrace yoga, meditation, lots of drugs, in particular LSD, right? And, the freedom of relationships that I just explained. Of course, it did not go unnoticed in India. And a lot of sort of yoga teachers, they came over to America at that time because, well, to be frank, there was a buck in it, right? They could make some money. So a lot of these young guys, they were, on drugs, and they're playing around with yoga asanas, and under the influence of Timothy Leary, who was kind of like a very influential young guy at the time, and he pushed the use of hallucinogens, in particular, as I said, LSD. And they're playing around with all of these different things, and they got into trouble. Not legally, right? But they raised the Kundalini a little bit, yeah, through their breathing that they'd learnt from this teacher, and their yoga asanas, and the help of the acid, of the LSD. But because their teacher wasn't expert and didn't have their welfare at the core of his heart, right? There were serious problems with some of them. They got sort of stuck between chakras or stuck outside their body, right? And all this sounds fascinating, isn't it? That it's really hell. And of course, a lot of them experience temporary and sometimes permanent psychosis, which means kind of like they went nuts, right? So my friend said to this very lovely student of his, maybe, ease up on that. He gave her the explanation that I've sort of just summarized. I've glossed over a lot of stuff here this evening, guys. A lot of very, very important stuff, all right? The misconceptions of the governments and all those leading our lives, right? And not just around money and technology, but the misconceptions, the main one is that you are a physical being, whereas in fact you are not. You are this amazing spiritual living entity, amazing, eternal, full of wisdom, full of youthfulness and beauty, right? The other misconceptions that they're building our lives on are that you can find perfect happiness and shelter here in this physical world and in physical experiences. And it's simply not, right? The heart and soul of the bhakti yoga process is mantra yoga. Back in the time of Lord Brahma, millions of years ago, right, it was foretold that in this period of time that we're living in now, Kali Yuga, that the yoga system for this period of time, the grassy, gentle slopes to the summit, right, which is a summit of peacefulness and happiness, is this process of mantra yoga. So I would like to invite you, thank you very much for listening, if you're still there. I would like you to invite you to just join me for 5 or 10 minutes and we'll just chant. I'm just by myself, I just have a small instrument here, I'm not a musician, right? To join me in some mantra meditation. It's called kirtan. And the way it's done is that I will lead the chant, a very simple chant. Om, spelled A-U-M, Hari, H-A-R-I, Om, yeah? I'll chant that a couple of times and then you can respond. So you might be just listening to it in your mind, right? Best thing though is to actually vibrate the sound, right? To make it audible, because that way you will engage a number of different senses. You will engage your tongue, your ears, right? Perhaps, because there's music, there's a degree of, melody and rhythm and stuff like that. You might sway a bit, etc., etc. So the more you can involve your body and your mind in your meditation, the easier it is and the more effective it is. Okay, so we'll start and just see how you go, So what I was saying before, yes, if I've piqued, if I've stimulated some sort of interest in anything, right, you're most welcome, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, to leave a comment or ask a question, or perhaps head to some of the links that may appear at the bottom of the whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. There'll be something there, that the guys who are doing the tech behind this will put there, right? Because it's really amazing stuff, and it has transformed my life. Adi Om, Om, 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 Adi Om. Adi Om, Om, Adi Om, Om, Adi Om, Adi Om. Adi Om, Adi Om, Adi Om, Adi Om, Adi Bo. Adi Om, Om, Adi Om, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Om, Adi Om, Om, Adi Om, Om, Adi Om, Om, Adi Om. So just sit or lie there and just let that mantra, Om, Hari Om, just vibrate in the heart and mind. And just rest your mind on it and in it. And practice it, guys. Don't be the philosopher. Be the practical seeker of happiness. Philosophy is nice. The sweet spots of philosophy are to be found in integrating and incorporating them into your daily life. So thank you very much for joining me. Namaste.